Hello, welcome to ModX Network Voices. My name is Ryan Smith, Washington State University, and this is where we highlight experts regarding modular and offsite construction, design and construction. I'm joined with my partner, Ivan Rupnik. Ivan, say hello today.
Hey Ryan, hey everybody.
Thanks, Ivan, for coming. Ivan will be asking starting off the questions when we get to that part. We're joined by Grace Kim. Grace is principal, founder, owner of Schemata Workshop in Seattle. She'll introduce herself. She's also been a great support for the school over the years, and as a Coug herself, go Cougs. Grace presented at a ModX event in Seattle. It was very well received and very insightful. And so we've asked her to come here today. Welcome, Grace. Thank you for doing this.
Yes, no problem. Glad to be here and glad to be a supporter of Washington State University. So I will just start by saying I have been practicing architecture for the last 28 or so years. My practice has been pretty diverse, but here in Seattle, when we started my firm, actually I'll go and start my slides, I guess. Let's see. Oops, there we go. Okay. So when we started my company in 2004, my husband, who's here pictured here, the two of us started the company with two others. And our focus is really on sustainability, affordable housing, social equity. And the practice has grown a little bit. We're still a small firm, but we try to be very diverse in terms of the types of projects, all reinforcing the idea of community and how strong communities have various different components. So the affordable housing is an extension of that passion and work. And one of the other things that that is important about the start of our company was in 2004. Modular was regaining interest in the professional community and the A&E construction industry. So we had been studying and looking at what was happening in the UK with Peabody Trust and had done a number of sort of smaller scale projects. And then this project came along. So I'll share with you kind of the background and the history of the Kirkland Avenue townhomes. So a little bit of statistics, maybe I think that they're kind of unique to Seattle and King County, but I think that we are facing a housing crisis nationwide. So just kind of looking at the number of households who need or seeking housing in this area in King County, and the demand that we have and kind of what we're actually adding. And it's not enough. So if we have a need for 156,000 homes, and this was for 2017, and that number has dramatically increased. The number of homes is in 2040 is 2044. This demand is not being met. In terms of the types of households and the number of households, I won't go into detail on these. It's helpful for us as we share information about who we're serving with affordable housing to kind of humanize. And so these give different profiles of different family types that might represent the different area median income. And it is not households that are struggling, it is people. So the supply of housing is what we're trying to focus on. There is no new net development, meaning that even though housing production is high, we're not changing the needle. The development costs are high, obviously. This is a graph that talks about the population growth that we've been seeing and the production that's been happening. So not quite there. And then really quickly, I know many folks watching this might know the benefits of modular, but for newcomers, especially those advocating for new types of construction for delivering affordable housing, there's definitely reduced permitting costs in that you're paying just for the labor and industries. permit and not the building permit itself. You'll pay for site costs and that sort of limited cost. There is a predictability of construction cost in general, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The construction duration, I'll share with my project, can be dramatically shortened, which means you can house people more quickly. The quality of what we got for the same price was considerably higher. I'll try to point those out. And then there's better sound insulation between units. Side to side, in multifamily housing, the sound insulation in site-built is quite reasonable. Top to bottom, the sound separation is not great in multifamily housing, and modular is actually able to achieve much better sound isolation. Controlled environment, so the materials are not getting wet, so there's no dry out period, there's no impact to indoor air quality for the residents. And then in terms of affordable housing, I think one of the biggest benefits is the wage rates. I know in our state and city, prevailing wage rates can be quite high. And when you apply those to large scale projects that are $20 million or $10 million, that can eat up a large chunk of the budget. And so the modular companies are able to use their own rates based in the factories wherever they're located. They are also great about minimizing construction waste. There's greater increased productivity because there's not people hunting around for tools, things that have walked away on a cold job site. There's increased safety, there's greater quality control, and then the impact to the surrounding neighbors during construction is quite significant. And I'll share a story about that when I share the slides. So this is the project that I'm going to share with you. It's the Kirkland Avenue Townhomes in Renton, Washington. It is 18 homes, most of them townhomes. There's 4 flats, and they were for families that were earning less than 50% of the area median income. 2 of the units were for homeless veterans, or for previously homeless veterans, and 2 of the units were barrier-free or accessible. So one of the key things about this project is that from the beginning, we knew that this would be modular construction. The owner had a strong desire to do that, and so we were prepared and ready. The standard dimensions for trucking is what we worked with. So the units, and these were the ideal numbers given to us by various modular vendors and trucking companies. So ideally, we would be working with units that are 14 to 16 feet wide, a planning dimension of 30 to 35 feet deep. And we did this because we knew these were going to be stacked units, and we weren't doing a double loaded corridor situation. And so we knew that if we put 2 of these units side by side into a single trailer width, then we could reduce the costs of shipping. So we were trying to maximize one load. So we designed this into bays. There's a living bay and then a bedroom bay. And in this case, this is a 1-bedroom unit nested in with a 2-bedroom unit, but they're all made up of individual bays that are, I think in our case, they were 14 by 30. So this is how the saw boxes were put together, side by side, kind of in a linear format. And these were actually 1 unit. So this unit could stack on top of this one. This is not a, this was the flat, not the townhouses. And then these dashed lines are the portions that get sawn away. So we had about a 66-foot dimension for ours. So this is the living module, as I mentioned before, and then this is how they could get combined into a 2-bedroom. So this is just kind of a simple planning exercise. Got ahead of myself and shared the way that those nest together. This was our site, a little L-shaped site that was at the corner. So the townhouses face Kirkland Avenue, which is the main, main street, and then 16th was a side street. And the 3-bedroom units were stacked, and the stacked flats were on that 16th Street side. The concept was, architecturally, the concept was to create a sort of simple archetypal house. And then we sort of split it down the middle and modulated. We thought the width of these units being only 15 feet wide or 14 feet wide, we thought it was too small to do a series of gables, one next to the other. So that was how we achieved sort of that familiar residential character, and yet we pushed the facades back and forth to articulate the individual homes. In terms of documentation, because this was a public housing authority that we were contracting the work through, they had a procurement requirement to go out for competitive bid. And so while I wouldn't recommend this for all projects, in the case of ours, we need to do competitive bids. So we made it very clear in our documentation what was field work and what was in the factory. 90% of the work was going to be done in the factory. The roofing and the siding, we wanted it to be done on site so that the envelope was one scope of work that the site contractor would be responsible for. And then the foundations and the earthwork were also part of the on-site contractor's scope. In terms of the documentation, you can see I've blown up here how we indicated what was work to be done in the field and what was the work to be done in the factory. That goes for the foundations as well. And we did that all throughout with the details as well. This is the site work being prepared. And at the same time, the construction was happening in the factory. And this was kind of the way that they went through their, our particular factory went through their sequencing. So there was station one and it would move across and then it would be rolled down and then it would move, and then it would move its way across and sort of work its way down. So that was kind of our factory's way of working and producing so that in 7 days we would have a complete box or a complete module. This is the factory as they were doing the work. So you can see this is the side-to-side movement that I was mentioning. Platforms being built here, raised up so that the plumbing and infrastructure work could be placed, and then combined with the pieces coming down on the rollers. This is some of the work on the rollers that was occurring. And then the interior finish work at the sort of last phases of the line. This was one of the units kind of towards the end of the line, a little bit rough still because they were still not done finishing. They have some protection board on the ground so that all the mud and tape and stuff was happening on top of that surface. This wall was left open during shipping. You can see a little piece in the ceiling. That was the connection to the bathroom upstairs. Yeah, I think that's kind of the big thing to point out. Our install took 4 days, and there were folks that lived across the street, had lawn chairs set up. They were watching. There was somebody that made a comment that when they left for work in the morning, there was nothing there, and at the end of the first day, came home and surprised that there were like homes literally constructed in front of his house. So this is what I say what I meant when I said that there's less disturbance to neighbors. I think one of the biggest impacts to on-site construction is the noise, the lack of parking or the congestion, and just the delivery of vehicles and all of that. So, no hammering and nail guns going off at 7 o'clock in the morning, no delivery trucks backing up and beeping to drop off large pallets of wood, and certainly not the disruption that usually happens for months prior to leading up to a construction of homes. This is what it looked like after they left. The roofs were framed and installed on site. We could have done that in the factory. The contractor chose to do that as site-built trusses that were trucked in and put on top. Before the roofing, this is how the units were delivered. You can still see that there's protection board or protection on the flooring, but all of the light fixtures and everything came finished. This was that wall that had been left exposed to connect above. And then you can see here, the stairs were also left exposed so that the carpet could be continuous all the way up on the stairs. The exterior, we chose to do additional continuous rigid insulation on the exterior in addition to the insulation in the walls. and then the siding going in, and then the finished project. And we were able to save enough of the mature trees on the front side of the street so that it actually has quite a good feel. This is one of the units finished, pretty compact. Oh, and this railing on the right-hand side was also installed in the field. There were some issues trying to figure the detail out with the factory, and so we just chose to do that in the field. Everything else in this unit, minus the furniture, came as is, and pretty compact units, but quite livable. And all of the units had sort of standard finishes and fit out. A couple of myths to debunk. Modular is not necessarily cheaper than site built. I think the biggest cost savings is achieved if you are able to be closer to a modular factory. And this is one of the reasons for increasing production, so that there could be more factories built closer to the sites. We used to have a factory right before the big recession in 2008. And that factory had sort of mobilized and geared up with a lot of new state-of-the-art equipment, and then the market fell out and they had to close. And so we had to get our modules from Idaho. Factories design the modules. The architects design the units, the homes. We just worked with the factory and trucking dimensions to make sure that what we were designing was efficient and cost effective. It is a myth that the construction quality is inferior. In fact, there were a number of cases, normally for this type of project, for an affordable housing project or any multifamily project, we usually have plastic laminate countertops. We got solid surface. We usually have hollow core doors. They were all solid core doors. So the quality of the product going in for the same cost is much higher. And that's what we found universally, because the companies, modular vendors, have buying power because they're producing so many units, so much more. The modules were built to IBC standards. You saw the drawing sets. We went through permitting through the city of Renton. Elle and I did permit the modules themselves, that they were all built to IBC standards. And they are real property. There is no chassis, as you saw. These modules are just wood bottoms. They were rolled onto in the factory, and they were craned in place. Some of the challenges to think about is that design decisions need to be made early. When we work on affordable housing projects, or even any multifamily projects, there's a tendency for the client to sort of defer and wait for to pick the final colors and finishes during construction, either for market reasons, because they want to pick the latest and greatest finishes that are, on par with the market when it comes out, or for just expediency, just wanting to delay some of the decisions till later. So all of the decisions really need to be made during sort of early schematics and design development. There is a need to, or it's beneficial to have an understanding and familiarity with the design and construction team of modular design. That way you're not trying to fit a round peg into a square hole with designs of units that are 20 feet wide, and then you're trying to, or I should say more like 18 feet wide, and trying to figure out how to make them more efficient. It's always possible. It just may come at a higher cost. So trying to work within the modular shipping widths are ideal. It might not work, modular might not work with the owner's procurement in the case of affordable housing. In the case of our client, the Renton Housing Authority had some capital that they could access so that they could front load some of the requirements for paying for deposits with the modular company and for the first sort of draw for the modular vendor. They were then reimbursed as soon as construction happened on site with the first draw request. The first draw was quite a big one. But not all owners have that ability and have that capital to work with. So the large deposits and the timing of the lender funding. Also, lenders for affordable housing projects often want to see the material installed. So having a big portion of the construction happening in a factory and not on site there was great hesitancy from the lender in doing that. The materials stored off-site was not an option, and that's why the owner had to front load and pay for some of those costs up front. Another challenge is that there's not always an experienced pool of general contractors who have done modular construction, or even if they've not done it, that are even willing to do modular construction. So just getting the general contracting group interested in doing this kind of construction is important. And then there's a hesitancy and a concern of relying on one major subcontractor, which is the modular vendor, to do a significant portion of the work. That the contractors that are willing to come on board, they have to get over that one big hurdle from themselves. Some lessons learned: assemble the team early. Make sure that you have the general contractor, the architect, the modular vendor, all kind of lined up at the beginning. That way they can work in concert as a team, as opposed to trying to bring someone along afterwards. In our case, it was bringing along the general contractor, which was challenging and difficult. Make sure that the design team is modular friendly, as I mentioned. So just kind of listing out the parcels or the team members. And then having early communications with the funders and the lenders for affordable housing, even more so important to make sure that the finances are sort of thought about and the sources and uses are contemplated before entering into this this agreement. And I think that might be my last slide. Let's see. Oh, nope, I just was stuck. So the other, oops, now I'm gonna have to go there again, sorry. The other challenge is documenting all proposed change orders. This is a standard thing that happens in on-site construction. When you're in the factory, it becomes a little bit harder to do, partly because the modular vendors aren't used to doing it. And so an agreement might be made on the factory floor. Those need to be documented in the RFI process so that the general contractor is aware of them and that it gets carried through in terms of costs and things like that. Insist on a prototype. It was our intention in our project to have a prototype. And unfortunately, because of some delays in contracting between the modular vendor and the contractor, the prototype, that time period got squeezed out. And so we weren't able to do it, and we did it on the first box coming through. But if you remember back to my slides, if there's a box coming through every 7 days, by the time we saw the first box, there were still things that were in the production line behind it. And so they weren't able to pick up the changes that were requested until the 7th box, basically. This is one of the prototype is one of the big selling points for affordable housing developers, is that they can see what the unit is going to look like and see the finishes and the fit out all in advance. And that, because that is determined ahead of time, there's no change orders. And that's a really huge benefit for affordable housing developers when there is no extra pot of money sitting aside waiting to be used or that could be tapped. So the prototype is a really important thing to look at. And then requiring the general contractor to observe the work in the factory, much like they would in their own site-built construction. Our contractor didn't quite understand that, and so they acted as if these were, refrigerators that were coming on site and that they didn't have any knowledge of what happened in the factory. The reality is it is a significant portion of their work and their scope that they are relying on a third party to produce for them. And so they should be looking as carefully in the factory as they would on site. I would say that one of the biggest challenges with modular construction is that it is looked at under a microscope in many ways similar to what on-site construction would be. I have said a number of times, if we looked at on-site construction with the same scrutiny as we did to modular construction, we would never build anything out of wood. The reality is that there are lessons learned on the first, second, third project, and this big 3X is to indicate the best results are likely to come if you could get the same team, the same architect, contractor, and owner to do 3 projects in a row. That way there's efficiencies learned, there's there's lessons learned, and best decisions can be made. And so then by the third one, then you really understand kind of what the benefits can be. All too often we have seen in our region, a private developer or a nonprofit has done one, and then everybody turns their attention to that one project. And whether it was the 100-year rainstorm that happened, or whether it was the general contractor that wasn't wanting to cooperate, there could be a number of different reasons, and those reasons happen on-site construction projects. It's just that they are not held to the same sort of scrutiny. So I've encouraged funders and owners and architects to really try to push for doing at least 3 in a row. And I firmly believe that if we are to look at modular construction as a way to speed up production of housing, that we may be able to sort of tip the scales and to meet some of the demand that we are seeing. So the time has come, I hope. We are in a housing crisis nationwide. And, there's no time better than now during an emergency to break the glass, to do something different, to break the cycles that we have, and to do something dramatically different. And so I hope that there are people that will be doing this, that will be inspired to think outside the box and figure out how to not continue doing what we are doing. That's great. And we need to not stop doing that, but how can we change the paradigm so that we can actually start to meet the housing crisis that we are seeing?
Thank you, Grace. Thanks very much. Yes, we'll go back to just the 3 of us here. There we go.
Yeah. No, it's great to see this presentation again. It was really insightful in February, and now being able to get it deeper and also try to understand it and share it with an even larger audience, Grace. So we really appreciate it. And we can sense, it's as somebody who's really dedicated to making the world a better place, as well as obviously staying in business as an architect. I was going to ask maybe just to kind of continue a little bit on that discussion you concluded with, which is that modular construction, on the one hand, it's not an automatic solution. It requires, like you said, these building up a team. It requires maybe 3 projects to get right. And then I think you alluded to it, but it seems like what you're saying is, and maybe you can explain that further, is that in a way, we all need to this is kind of advocacy project too, whether we're architects or developers or builders. We have real problems that we're not able to solve, and the modular industry is something that we're working on as a group. It's not something that maybe exists in its entirety. But so how do we balance that chicken egg situation? Is that what you're describing? And why do you stick with modular with all of its challenges, but also with its promises?
Yeah. Well, in order to try to address the housing crisis and the shortage of housing, we just produce more, right? And so the conventional models are going to stay, or will always remain. There's, that's fine. They produce great construction jobs and boost the economy in other ways. So that stream of housing will continue. But as I showed in some of the earlier slides, we're never going to get to the production that will meet the demand if we just keep doing what we're doing today. The status quo is not enough. And so I have seen the modular factories literally pumping out, in most cases, hotel units, but the hotel industry is gone, right? So how do we take that same production cycle and use it to address the housing crisis in front of us? It is not the solution, but it is one of, hopefully a multi-pronged solution. And I'm confident that is, it needs to be a way that we build in the future. I think it's important to think about modular construction as an avenue. It is not the silver bullet, but it is a solution. And I stick by that because I've seen the potential. I've seen the potential impact that it could have in terms of producing literally the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands, depending on your area, the country, that it could literally produce. And when we are at 80 to 100 units 1,000 units behind. I don't know how else we're going to do it unless we start looking at that technology. Yeah. And there was another piece of your question that you said at the end that sparked something, and now I'm forgetting it. Do you remember the end of your question? It was a social change question, actually.
Well, I guess, I mean, what I was,
For me,
it was really more of a proposition that maybe we're all, you know, I guess one of the things that, and you're an example of it, and I think a lot of people that have continued to advocate for the modular industry, is that the modular industry isn't something out there, a bunch of manufacturers. It really is the owners, the developers, the contractors, the architects, the inspectors, and those obstacles become much less, and the results become much better when we understand all of us as the modular industry, as opposed to, I think, the perception of us showing up at almost like a car dealership or a 3D printer or a laser printer, right, and printing our building. It isn't that. But it is a framework, and I think that's something, you know, you show, and we've seen that. It's interesting because we've seen that the three, whether it's public housing, affordable housing, or whether it's market rate housing, that story has been the same, that really the teams are important, but also those teams developing know-how through the work. And then showing up at any factory isn't going to necessarily, it's not going to work for the factory, it's not going to work for the owner, and it's not going to work for the team involved, it seems like. But those results are worth the effort.
Yeah, I think you did spark the kind of what I was thinking about. I think one of the really important things about modular housing is kind of what you just said, the idea of, like, you know, walking into a showroom and kind of customizing. It's not quite that, but for a developer, it can be that, right? And I think if I think about sort of why we have this housing crisis and what we're missing the middle of the market, right? We have the high-end custom, you know, go to the factory showroom and pick out your model, to the low end meaning the price point, the affordable housing, low income housing. Those two ends are being addressed by our marketplace. But the intense pressure that we are feeling and the rise of homelessness is because that middle is not being addressed, right? There's the people that are in the higher bracket range, even though the tech workers in Seattle can afford to pay $5,000 or $8,000 a month for rent, they want to pay too. Like, that's not an unreasonable thing. So they're paying what the middle can pay, and they're pushing those people out. They're either pushing them out onto the streets, or they're pushing them down into the lower affordable housing types that are available. If we don't address that middle of the market, we're gonna continue to exacerbate this problem of housing that we have. And I think that the piece that modular construction can fit is that middle market. Like, how do we reinstitute social housing in the US again? Like, couldn't there be good quality, like, you know, great quality housing for the average person? It doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles, but it's a great place to live at a reasonable cost. I think modular is the way that we could get there. But without something like that, I don't know how we're going to achieve that. The market just is not producing that, right? The market is not producing 2 and 3 bedroom rental homes for the average family. So
it seems like that's the full story, and it's really helpful to understand from somebody who's really gone through it, but also somebody who really believes in, you know, making the world a better place, which is a good thing to discuss on a day like today. But is that, you know, one of the key things is that we just don't have enough housing, and that we don't have enough, and conventional construction, even if with higher prices, can't keep up with the demand. And really, we need more capacity. And that's where modular is key. So, and we all believe, I think, on this call, that speed does lower cost, but also as the industry grows, actual cost will go down too. The financing will change. But even without that discussion, being able to produce more housing means more opportunities for developers, and actually more solutions for the people that need housing. And that seems like a pretty good reason to keep hammering at this problem.
Yeah. I mean, especially right now, it's like, you know, if the economy is hurting, like, why wouldn't this be a natural place to sort of infuse with money and just get people housed? Even if it's not cheaper, it's faster, right? I mean, it's not that it's going to be more expensive. It's just the same cost. For the cost, why wouldn't you want to take advantage of the faster housing.
Grace, thank you for joining ModX Network Voices and spending time with us presenting the Kirkland Townhomes case study. And keep us abreast if you start working on another modular project. We'd surely like to have you come back and tell us more about your lessons learned. Thanks so much.
Thank you.